good evening. My name's Mark Sun. I'd like to see you all here today. I had my brain surgery 40 years ago this year. I went to Echo the Bunnyman concert and I had ringing in my ears for a while. And then suddenly I needed to have brain surgery. And deaf Murray there. And then my hearing and vision kept changing. This was before the internet. So I grew up with technology, knowing that technology was to be always very helpful. I went through Knox College. And I started working as a paralegal and I moved to New York because of Bright Light's a big city. And then the technology, as much as technology made it easier for me to work, I actually had a harder time staying employed because companies actually don't necessarily like making accommodations. It's through multiple wonderful legal problems or legal challenges. I have dealt with them and you get to see. And anyway, I got into disability advocacy just because I had a lot of issues. I realized that the laws are really bad, and you realize that no one's paying attention. But we're gathered here tonight. We've been doing a lot of disability advocacy for our deaf blind community and for other disabilities because we realize that the communication challenges of our deaf blind community are very unique. Yet at the same time, the only way to resolve a lot of our challenges are to help collaborate with other people who have different challenges and use our strength to enact systemic change. Because we really need to embrace accessibility as infrastructure. There's, it's really difficult because I didn't have, we wanted to have a team of Terps up on site, but we literally could not find them. And so, really glad that we were able to pull together all four candidates. This is Member Valdez, Mitchell Kumar, Borough President Antonio Reynoso, and Councilmember Julie Wan. I've all graciously agreed to be here and discuss disability issues. So I think it's really critical that we've got a very challenging federal situation. We've got a very challenging state situation where the governor has proposed the PPO takeover. We have a city where our mayor wants to spend $25 million on bike storage. And the council itself is considering Intro 303 and is refusing to let our community present testimony. So, and fortunately, Christopher Alvarez from Able News has agreed to be moderator. So I will turn it over to Chris.
Thank you, Mike. Good evening, welcome. The last time I was on a forum, disability forum, there were only two mayoral candidates who eventually dropped out of the race, came in person. So I am glad to see more political leaders here tonight. As you all may know, there are approximately 1.5 million people with disabilities in New York City and 70 million in the US. This is a very important race as the 7th congressional district is one of the most expensive in the country and it's mostly driven by small businesses. Thank you to CUNY for hosting us, and without further ado, get right to it. First question, each of you have been critical about the federal government have funding military operations, but not having enough money for health care, child care, and issues that concern the daily public. Are you able to give a nominal figure as to how much money should be invested in people with disabilities? And what are the top 3 issues affecting us that figure should cover? Julie Ward.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's so good to see you all. My name is Julie Won. I'm currently a city council member representing Long Island City, where we're sitting Woodside, Sunnyside, and Astoria. And I am honored to be here with you all. Thank you for facilitating this space and for asking this really important question. Right now, I think it's really important for us to understand that those of us who are in this room, even if you are able-bodied now, that you can become disabled any moment because you just never know what's going to happen. And for care, every single one of us deserve to have assisted care without breaking the bank. Because what we know is that in the city of New York or in the state of New York, for a family of four, you have to make under $31,000 in order to qualify for Medicaid, which is the only health insurance that allows you to have home assisted care. That is unacceptable, because that means that you can't even work a minimum wage job because you're gonna have to choose between, do I take assisted care or do I work? And that is completely unacceptable and has to be changed. I would say the top three issues that I would work on if elected to Congress, first and foremost, is making sure that we claw back and fight against the Medicaid funding cuts. We're gonna see in January after the midterms over almost $1 trillion of federal funding cuts that are going to impact every single one of us in every community when it comes to healthcare access, especially for those who are low income and those who are disabled. And secondly, I would say that when it comes to accessibility, the federal government, state government, and the city government, when it comes to litigation and accountability, it puts the onus on those who need the accessibility to sue and to report to say that this ain't right. That's really not okay. You already have enough going on in your life. It should not be your responsibility to keep the government accountable constantly, because all of us benefit from disability accessibility. So for example, the buttons that you get to press to open the door automatically. As a new mom, when I had to carry my groceries and also push my stroller, I really needed that button. But that's only there because you all advocated on my behalf to have that. For all the elevators that came in on the 7 train, that was all advocated from the accessible ADA community, and I get to benefit from it because I can't carry my stroller with my 2 kids up the stairs to get on the 7 train. So we have to change the way that we keep the government accountable for when they are not meeting their own laws on the federal, state, and city level for when it comes to accessibility. And thirdly, like you said, when it comes to funding, we have to adequately fund to make sure that we have ADA accessibility for our public transit, for our schools. It's unacceptable that New York City's public schools are still not ADA compliant, as well as our parks and any sort of public amenity, our libraries. We had to go through a huge legal battle at our Hunters Point Library in Long Island City, where they spent billions of dollars to build this beautiful museum, but they did not even check to make sure that it would be ADA compliant. Unacceptable. So those are the 3 things that I would work on if elected to Congress. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Junior.
All right, thank you, Chris. Thank you all for having us. This is our second debate, and we're happy to be joined by Kumar this time, and want to make sure that Assemblyman Valdez, you can stay there as long as you want, okay? That's a joke, probably not a good one. I want to be honest. I think that the issue we have is that the United States and many here at the state and city level see the work for accessibility as a burden, and they don't see it as mandatory and a right, a human right, that we should all be complying with as a bare minimum. Councilmember Julie Won is correct in saying that accessibility across the board is something that we shouldn't have to sue for to get. It's something that we should actually just be able to get standard across the board. I'll give one example. We should be tying all of our funding that comes from the federal government to basic ADA accessibility standards. If that doesn't happen, the funding from the federal government should be threatened for any agencies or any organizations that are using that funding should they have not met the goals that we set at a bare minimum. Right now we're seeing amazing advancements in our public transportation system, specifically because of the work and advocacy of people like here have done. But again, the city, the state, and the federal government shouldn't see these as burdens, but as bare minimums. So my advocacy would be to fight in ensuring that legal compliance with the law is set forth and followed through on as the first. And the second thing is I want to talk about is my son has autism. my youngest son, Andres. And right now, access to services for families with young children with autism is very hard to obtain. And once you have it, you have to keep fighting for it. I'm the borough president. My son lost maybe 6 months worth of necessary educational opportunities. But because the city was inefficient, they didn't pay their workers on time, they didn't pay their workers enough, they didn't have enough workers or educators to make that happen. No parent should go through a process by which resources for their kid that can set them back exponentially, especially those that are neurodivergent and on the spectrum. No parent should be fighting against the city of New York to get those services. They should be standard. And right now, the only way that I would be able to be compensated for the loss of services is to sue the city. It shouldn't be that way in any way, shape, or form. They should have systems in place by which I get compensated immediately by the city of New York should the resources and services not be provided by us. We shouldn't have to apply for it. So the two things that I would be focused on are making sure that the mandates and the legal requirements for ADA accessibility are things that we get done before funding or funding can be removed if you don't accomplish that. Another thing is building a system by which parents don't need to sue or ask the city for money that they should have, or services that they should have already received for kids that are disability, are neurodivergent, and autistic like my son. So those are two things that I would do. Thank you.
Hello everyone, Bijal Kumar. I've been a public defender in New York for the last 20 years. Thank you all for being here, for our hosts, our sponsors, and particularly to Mark for making sure that I got to actually be on this stage as well this time, so thanks for that. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about myself because I think I'm probably new to some of y'all. I've been a public defender in New York for the last 20 years, standing with communities on their hardest days. When ICE tried to tear families apart, when landlords tried to evict them, when employers denied them their livelihood, and when they couldn't even get basic fundamental benefits like food stamps and SSI, that's where I stood with them. But it wasn't just about showing up when harm was at its greatest. It was about building new systems that ensured that they got their long-term stability and their goals met. We called it holistic defense, and I did it with thousands of New Yorkers. What was critical about this approach, though, was the recognition that we can't just continue to talk about issues in this siloed way. It's not just about housing, it's not just about healthcare, it's not just about employment. There's intersectionality in all of these issues. We know that stable housing means that you're 80% less likely to have contact with the criminal legal system, or 70% more likely to be able to keep a job. So every time we talk about issues in a siloed way, we actually prevent the ability to think about things in an intersectional, holistic way that will ensure that communities get all of the care that they need. And let's talk about communities. What's critical when we're thinking about accessing services or building new systems is that the tent that that community covers is everyone, which includes the disability community. The council member made a great point about those buttons, and I was thinking about MTA elevators, right? Elevators that we have talked about, where 2/3 of the stations in the subway right now do not have elevators. Who relies on those elevators? Everyone, right? It's not just the disability community. It's parents with strollers. It's people who just got off knee surgery. It's elderly people with walkers. But when we make conversations about just for this community, we actually lose the power that we have to talk about and impact change. So the three things that I would focus on, to the extent that I can limit it to three, is the through line of the intersectionality of all these issues. The first is, of course, housing. New York is the only jurisdiction across the entire country, and I've traveled a lot of them, that Section 8 for the last 20 years has been open for 3 weeks, and that's the wait list. That's not actually to get federal benefits. New York is devoid of housing. We know even in this district, across the city, how many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people still rely on just Medicaid or no health insurance at all. How is it that we don't have basic needs met, including health insurance? And three is, we need a real partnership with small businesses. We talk a lot about accountability for small businesses. in small businesses, supporting the disability community. Small businesses are the lifeblood of New York. They are the fabric of our communities. And in order to ensure that they're successful, we need to stop talking about penalizing them and start talking about how it is that we can build partnerships so that way they can also continue to thrive and make the city what it is.
Thank you very much. Since you all started with transportation and the subway system, let's start with how you guys will.
Do you want to give Claire an opportunity?
Claire, I'm sorry.
No apology needed. I'm sorry that I'm in Albany. We're still negotiating the state budget. Unbelievably, it is now 21 days late. I guess believably. This is how this happens sometimes. Hi everyone. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Mark, for helping to organize. Thank you to everyone for being here and for providing this remote accommodation for the folks who need it. My name is Claire Valdez. I'm a state assembly member representing the 37th district. That's Long Island City, Sunnyside, Woodside, Maspeth, and Bridgewood. I'm really grateful to be here. You know, my friends on the stage have talked about the fact of human rights in this conversation, the fact that we need full and equal participation in society for everyone, no matter where you are from, no matter your ability, no matter your moment in life. And it's an absolute necessity that there's real equity in the way that our government protects every single person and makes sure that our transit and our housing, our workplaces all reflect those essential facts. So I think the question was around the three things that we would be focusing on. I think it's essential that we are overturning the Medicaid cuts that were advanced through the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill. We're seeing right now in New York State many thousands of people potentially losing their health care because of the Medicaid cuts, and this will absolutely disproportionately affect folks who rely on home health aides, who rely on advanced medical care, all kinds of things. And we have to reverse those cuts, bring that money back into our communities. I think the state has a real role to play in that fight, but it has to happen at the federal level as well. We have to talk about accessibility in housing and in transit. We all use the subway, we all use buses. Most of us use buses every single day. Those have to be accessible. The process of installing elevators at our subway stations is taking a very long time. And in that time, we have our neighbors who are struggling with stairs, who might not even be able to use the subway system to get where they need to go. And it's profoundly unjust and unequal. And so funding those accessibility improvements, making our busways fast so that buses which are accessible can move quickly through the city and get people where they need to go. Those will be absolute priorities. When we talk about housing and the federal supply of public housing, when we talk about social housing, all of that funding has to be tied to accessibility and making sure that these new units that come online are ADA compliant and accessible to anyone who actually needs to live there. And I think we have to talk about the workforce that provides care. Home health aides are among the lowest paid workers in our economy. They have to have dignified working conditions, good wages, in order to provide the care that is so essentially needed by so many members of our community. And I think there's federal legislation around to make the Medicaid funding more accessible for states that are providing for that workforce. There are rules around, we might talk about this later, but there are rules around how long these shifts can be. Protecting that workforce will be really important to make sure that we have qualified, well-trained folks to take care of all of our neighbors. Those are the things that I would prioritize in Congress, and again, really grateful to be here with you all and looking forward to the forum.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you all. So, as I was saying, most of you started with transportation and subway system. So, let's start with that. How will you ensure that the OTA can comply with its commitment to deliver accessible subways in a timely manner? They are supposed to do it by 2055, and they are deciding whether some should have elevators or ramps or rail audio bridges. So, how do you ensure they will be ADA compliant service? And is 2055 a fair goal, or is that too far? We'll start with Antonio.
Thank you. No, it is not a fair goal. I think it's far too away for where we need to be to finally get into compliance. We should have never been where we are now. And I think this lack of enforcement, this lack of oversight has led us to the point where we are now, where we have to spend billions of dollars just to make a system that should have already been accessible long before accessible now. The things that we've done so far, and I want to talk about some of the progress we've made thanks to the disability community, but congestion pricing, it was a big deal when it was a big fight. But the big fight for congestion pricing was to be able to make upgrades and ADA accessibility more palatable to a system that is financially in a hardship. So we did our part. We advocated for that deeply. We were polling at 30% favorability on this issue, but knew that what was not popular in the polls is still something we needed to do morally to make sure that we gave access to be able to move around the city freely to not only the disability community, but to other folks, like folks with strollers, folks that are sick, and for us to benefit from all of the amazing upgrades and changes that are going to be made to our subway system. So I think the timeline we have now is worst case scenario. We should be working to have it happen sooner. One thing I would say is that the governor negotiated a lower price for congestion pricing, which I don't think we should have done. We should have kept it at the level it was. We had projections that were supposed to get us to where we need to get to. If you lower the price, it hurts our ability to do that. It seems like they're delaying the increase again, which is going to just make it so that less money comes into the system and allows us to clear the gap with the MTA. And we also have something called the IBX in Brooklyn and Queens that we're trying to build. The IBX should start with every single station in ADA compliance across the board, not a couple of stations, not every other station, but every single one. And those are things that we can do, again, holding folks accountable, doing bold things like supporting congestion pricing. And again, like I said, we have to fight or make sure the governor knows that $9, $12 is not enough. We need to get it back to 15, which was the number that we were looking for from the beginning, and we would be able to accomplish this long before 2055 or whatever date that the MTA gave us.
One follow-up. $15, it's a little high for working families, don't you think?
I think once the $15 is high, but it's not a number that would make it so that people feel it if we have a viable, reliable, safe transportation system that is public. When you know that you can get to a place faster, when you get to a place safely through a public transportation system for a fraction of the cost, you won't have to pay that toll. You won't have to pay to go over the bridge. We should talk about exceptions in the case of people going to medical appointments and having emergency care and so forth. But outside of that, I think the $15 that we're asking people to pay is more a reflection of our priorities to assist the people, the majority of the people in the city of New York that take public transportation. So it's a price that I'm willing to support for the greater good.
No, we should not settle to have to wait 30 years. I'm a radically impatient person when it comes to enacting change. It's been the hallmark of my career. A client, a family member, a community member told me about something that didn't work, and my plan was, well, we should fix this, right? Because why should we accept that things will continue to be the way that they are, that this is how government works, or that this is how things get done? I've never been an elected official that had the opportunity to influence those things. So what we need to do is, what I talked about earlier, is there isn't enough pressure on our lawmakers to make the change happen. The money is out there, but there isn't any accountability towards the MTA to ensure that they comply with what they're supposed to do. They get to miss targets, they get more money. They don't complete they build and renovate a new elevator, a new subway stop in the Bronx, and don't even put in an elevator. What happens? Nothing. It takes an individual to bring in the Department of Justice to file a lawsuit to finally get an elevator in a subway stop that was renovated. So there's no accountability, and there's no private cause of action that's available, right? In order to sue the city, you have to file a notice of claim. You have to file that within 90 days of the date of the incident. When I was working in the Bronx, I know about accountability, started this police misconduct clinic that gave community members access to the resources they needed to hold law enforcement accountable. When the comptroller did a study about notice of claims that were filed in New York City, they found that 50% of them came from this one small spot in the South Bronx, which was the office that I worked in, that built this out, because we needed to have accountability. So we need to have some type of private cause of action to ensure compliance, to make sure that the MTA is actually delivering on what's expected, and we need pressure from a much larger community. This isn't just a disability issue. Everybody benefits from the elevator, right? This is something we all want. And then let's also take a step back. We're talking about subway stops, but how do you get to the subway? Not for everybody can they just get to the subway. Countless client after client that I worked with relied on Access-a-Ride. For those of you not familiar with Access-a-Ride, it was a service that you could call from the city. They would come pick you up and take you to your destination. If any of you have had experience with Access-a-Ride, like, God bless them, I think they're trying very hard. But the amount of people that I've worked with that missed work, that missed an appointment, that didn't get to court on time, that didn't get to their treatment provider, couldn't get to their doctor because Access-a-Ride wasn't actually functioning properly or on time, was countless. So we can talk about transportation as a subway issue, but that doesn't actually understand the full complexity of the issue. And we also need to ensure that we have resources and compliance and accountability for the agencies that are supposed to be providing these services.
If we waited until 2055, right? 2055, I'll be 65 years old. Woo! Just in time for my senior years of my arthritis. So I'm just kidding. It is really, really horrible. And as the former chair of contracts, I think a lot about why the heck does it take over 10 years for me to get an elevator? Because even before getting elected as a community board member for CB2, we fought for over 2 decades, probably even longer than that. It's just 2 decades since I became 18, and I knew that we were fighting for that in our community in Sunnyside, because Sunnyside and Long Island City to Woodside, most of Queens is overground. The 7 train is an overground subway for us. That means that you have to climb at minimum 5 flights of stairs to get to the 7. So for us, after years and years of advocacy, thank God for Senator Mike Gianaris, RIP, he's retiring, but God bless that man because he's been around forever, since I was like 18 years old. But he was able to get us subway accessibility funding for both the N, the R, and all the 7, which is amazing. And we've been fortunate enough where we now have subway elevators that are either being built or have been opened, but that took us over 10 years because of the procurement process. So the procurement process and the rules of state and city procurement on why this takes so long for us to build an elevator is much more than just ADA accessibility, but it's years and years of corruption that has led to over bureaucracy and over regulating how we do city procurement and state procurement to build anything, whether it's a park, whether it's a bus stop, or even an elevator. So that really has to be work through in the state and city level to make sure that we're streamlining procurement so that it doesn't take us over 10 years to build anything in a capital project. But in addition to that, to be hyper-focused, what we think about in my office as city council member when we do our land use projects are MTA tax abatements, where we can partner with developers as well as the MTA to think about different tax abatements where we are incentivizing developers to invest in getting air rights for their buildings so that they can build more density, but it forces them to invest in making our MTA stations more accessible. So for example, the Court Square stop, that was built for ADA accessibility. The developer personally paid, privately paid for that elevator for the E and the F and the M for free for the city of New York because they were able to get that tax abatement from the state. In addition to that, right now for the One Long Island City project, we're able to get over $98 million of funding for ADA accessibility for the MTA for the F train because that underground subway still lacks accessibility and it needs dire upgrades. So I think we have to, one, first and foremost, fix city contracting and state contracting because it's unacceptable that any sort of physical infrastructure upgrade costs us millions of dollars, more than a markup of what it would take if you did it privately. And it also takes us over 10 years on average to build just about anything. And that's unacceptable. And secondly, when we have MTA upgrades, it should not take this long because of the funding. And as the borough president said, we fought really hard to get congestion pricing, and one of the biggest incentive drivers for passing congestion pricing was to make sure that we have proper funding to get the elevators in. And when Hochul decided to roll it back, I was on the news screaming with my baby and my stroller saying, how the heck am I gonna get upstairs now and go to work if you roll back congestion pricing and you're gonna defund all these elevator upgrades that are way past due? But it can't come at the harm or the expense of those who also depend on their vehicles because the public transit is simply not there. So we have to have exemptions, and we've been at the hearings where I've testified to the MTA when they were reviewing congestion pricing and the feds to say we have to have exemptions for those who require ADA accessibility so that they can get to doctors and to make sure that we aren't breaking the bank for people who simply need it. So there's a lot of work to be done for the MTA, and we also, one other thing I want to call out is that we have to reverse the MTA's rule excluding ADA litigants from its advisory committee. That is unacceptable. And we also want to see a bill. I know that our state assembly member is going to speak next. I would love to see a bill in the state for real-time elevator outage data. Imagine if we could see in real time the same way we can see in real time when the subway is coming. We need to be able to see when there's an outage, because it's not okay for me to go with my stroller with my babies and then be told, oh, nope, this elevator is broken today, and it may not be back online for God knows when. And it's just on our mom's WhatsApp groups to say, hey, the E train elevator is out. Don't take the E, take the M, or go somewhere else. And then I have to beg the generosity of a stranger to ask somebody to help me get my stroller up and down the stairs. Thank you.
Assembly member?
Yes, okay. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what has been said. I think what we need, so essentially, are real investments in our mass transit system to make these accessibility improvements happen, to make elevator installations happen as quickly as possible. We have to acknowledge we're working with an old system that requires many different improvements and accessibility upgrades, but it shouldn't take a decade to install an elevator. We should be looking at procurement. Elevators are incredibly expensive, and I think federal investments here should be thinking about how to make savvier investments and procurement decisions there. Congestion pricing was such a victory for New York City that is currently bringing millions of dollars of investment into our public transit system. And in order to raise the fee, which I absolutely support doing as well, we need to be able to see real material differences in our subway system, in our bus system, for people to be willing to make that additional sacrifice. The promise of congestion pricing is that we can get more people out of private vehicles and into mass transit because the mass transit will work well. And until that happens, I think we'll have a $9 fee, but it's such a demonstration of a program that can work around the country, and I think we should be supporting that work. I appreciate Councilmember Wan's suggestion of the bill. I think that's great, and in particular, we've seen so many of these kind of public-private partnerships around escalators and elevators really fall down in part because our private partners are not holding up their end of the bargain. And so we need real oversight too, not just of the MTA and the procurement practices and why things are moving so slowly, but of our private partners who are directly responsible for managing those elevators and escalators. I know that I've shared the frustration of coming to the same escalator that is broken again and having to climb up or climb down. And if you are unable to do that, that, absolutely derails your opportunity to use mass transit. And it's unacceptable that our city would not be, that someone in New York City would not be able to use our mass transit system to get where they need to go. So we need massive, I think, federal investment in our mass transit system to make it accessible and ADA compliant, to bring even more buses online to fill gaps while we're waiting for things like the IBX to come online. And I'm absolutely, we're fighting for that funding at the state level right now, but we need it at the federal level as well.
Good. Thank you very much. Councilmember Valdez? Are we done, okay?
Yeah, we're good.
Councilmember Valdez, I'm gonna start with you here. People with mobility issues are having trouble getting around our streets because of construction, because NYPD park on the sidewalks, and because of proliferating bike lanes. So, in addition, the mayor, Mavani, has proposed to start a pilot program, once again, for free buses in preparation of the World Cup. And he wants to redesign bike lanes in Brooklyn Bridge in connection to Manhattan. Councilmember Valdez, you are known as the transit candidate. So, do you think it is safe for wheelchair users to move on bike lanes? And should accessory be included in that free bus pilot program?
I'm so sorry, Chris. We're having a little bit of trouble hearing you on the Zoom. If you can repeat maybe the last part of the question, or...
Yeah, the last part of the question was access to for wheelchairs on bike lanes, and coinciding with the free buses for the World Cup, also allowing for Accessorize to be a part of the free service for transportation during the World Cup, and whether or not you support that.
So I absolutely support free, bus service during the World Cup. I think I'd support free bus service for year-round. But I think especially given how much revenue is going to come to the city via the World Cup, how many visitors there will be, we should be investing in transit for folks to be able to go and enjoy the game. I think the question was around using bike lanes when sidewalks are out of service. I'm certainly open to talking about that idea. I think we'd need a lot of kind of like signage and wayfinding to make sure that that's a safe accommodation. We'd be dealing with a lot of different users on the road in that instance, traveling at different speeds for different purposes. But it's true that New York City sidewalks are constantly under construction, that there's constantly scaffolding in place that makes orienting your, getting through the city incredibly difficult. And we need better options for people who might have difficulty there. I'll say the mayor's response to, for example, the snowstorm that happened recently, the second version. I think there are a lot of learning experiences from the first one, but snow clearing and being really aggressive in that way, acknowledging that people that a slippery sidewalk or a sidewalk that has debris or is uneven, it might be an inconvenience to some, but it might be a real hazard to others, and we have to take those things incredibly seriously. So I'd be open to thinking through using bike lanes in places where sidewalks are impassable, and I think we need many more accessibility upgrades and to make our transit or accessible transit free for all, not just during the World Cup.
Victor?
Yeah.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Yes.
My name is Antoinette. I live in Woodside, Queens. They are renovating the Severn train on 69th Street and Roosevelt Avenue. And I asked the MTA worker, are you guys putting an elevator? No. When you do major renovations, the government knows, the MTA knows, that they have to be made accessible. Then they have to get sued, as somebody mentioned on panel, and then they will go and retrofit it. Why don't you guys put something, a law, a rule that says we will not give you permission to renovate the station, right? Because they do need permits, I'm assuming, unless part of that renovation includes elevators. Like, that's a waste of our money. That's money comes out of my paycheck, my family's paycheck, everybody in the neighborhood, and then they waste another millions of dollars to put the elevator in. And last time with the Bronx station, Cuomo was complaining that now they have to spend all this extra money to put an elevator. Why didn't you put it in the first place if you know that that's the law? Like, the MTA is either private or they take our tax dollars. So if they do take our tax dollars, they should follow the law. Why, as you in government, can't make them? I don't, like, that's where I'm stuck. Be like, no, you can't renovate unless the renovation includes an elevator.
Would you like
That's my
us?
question.
Would you like us to respond to that one or continue with the original question?
I mean, okay, guys, if you have a response, go ahead. If not, we could move on. I'm sorry for the interruption.
No, there's no interruption at all. I'll take a quick stab at it, and I completely agree. Right? Like, why are government officials allowed this to happen? It's their opportunity, their responsibilities as our elected representatives to ensure that the MTA is complying with to meet the basic needs of our communities. This is why I think we need a real private cause of action, because if government officials aren't going to do it, then community members should be allowed to, because that is the only way it seems like we get recourse. I've been a lawyer, I've seen this. This is what we have to do. We have to sue, we have to wait years, we have to wait and hope the courts agree with us to finally get government to act in the way that is responsible and responsive to our community's needs.
Just to keep things moving, Julie Wong, I'll ask you a different question. So I don't know about all you guys, but I am tired about hearing other places being ahead of us in terms of accessibility. New Jersey is building inclusive playgrounds, extracurricular activities. What legislation would you support to build more playful environments for people with disabilities, children with disabilities, so they could smile here in New York City? Let's start with doing the work. And then you're an advocate for parks.
Okay.
as a mom of two, it's extremely apparent when you go to a park and it isn't accessible or it isn't really built for every child. And it really breaks my heart. My cousin is a teacher at a District 75 school, and she points this out to me all the time, where even Google Classroom is not built for accessibility features for all of her students. And it's leaving a lot of students behind. So when it comes to parks, again, we run into the same problem where we spend an exorbitant amount of money to build any park, and a lot of the times, even though we have these public hearings for public design sessions where the public is invited to come and participate in the designing of the park, oftentimes those meetings aren't really accessible for everybody. So I think it's that same idea where I've heard from you and others multiple times where it's don't design anything or like don't do things for us without us. And we have to make sure that every single public hearing, if somebody is not attending from the ADA community, that we have to make sure that we reach out to you all to say, hey, I know you couldn't make this meeting for XYZ reasons. We have to meet you where you're at and ask you for feedback on your timeline. It has to be reasonable. We can't give you too much time because then we'll just end up falling behind in our deadlines. But we have to be accessible and say, okay, I know that, Chris, you couldn't come to this public hearing where we had this design session. Here's where we're at. This is the design feedback that we've gotten so far. What do you think? And is this really ADA accessible for all children to enjoy? And how can we make this better? And whether that's the entrance to a park, the gate of a park. I've gone to the playground multiple times where parents have pointed out to me that for children who have accessibility needs, that a gate that opens sideways by dragging, that's not going to be accessible. You're not even going to be able to enter. And even a gate that drags this way, how are you supposed to enter if the gate is constantly closed? So how are we thinking about even the entryway into a park? And once at the park, what kind of swings do you have? Because we've had to fight for our public parks to have swings that are ADA accessible so that all children can enjoy the swing. And what other play features do we have? And what kind of walkways do we have? Is it only grass where you can't get through in a wheelchair? Do you have certain parts that are a pathway that is concrete so that a wheelchair can easily access and navigate through the park? So there's a lot of design features that those who are able-bodied may not really always think about. But we know that with you at the table that we would have that. And I just also want to answer the person who was speaking on the Zoom that I think there's three things that we have to uncouple. First and foremost, I understand and hear all of your frustrations that you look at elected officials and you're like, why haven't you done anything? Well, if it was so easy, Antonio and I would have done it, and Assemblymember Claire Valdez. But the truth is, at the end of the day, the agencies that we're talking about, right, the MTA, the Parks Department, those answer only to the executive, which is the mayor and the governor. Unfortunately, we are not the mayor nor the governor, and I don't have the free-willing magic wand to be like, hey, commissioner of so-and-so agency, go and do that. The only thing that I can do is to have oversight over the agency and have a hearing to say, hey, you're doing this wrong. And we also go into a fight and negotiation with the agency to say, hey, you need to pass these bills because you are not doing your job. And that takes a lot of organizing and coalition building, which means that we have to have a supermajority to pass those bills. So bureaucracy is not easy, and it is easy to like point fingers and blame other people for things that aren't getting done. But any government system, the processes exist, and we have to learn to navigate them and also always be innovative to think about how we're going to fix it. But long story short, I want to say that for the Woodside stations, we have the elevator and the escalators that are coming in currently planned. And just because we don't currently see construction for all of them, it doesn't mean that we can't fight for the funding, because by law, every single one of them have to be ADA accessible. But the timeline that we currently have is not acceptable, so we have to figure out how to get more funding, like congestion pricing at full price like we originally had proposed, and other streams of revenue, and federal funding especially, to make sure that we have funding to get all these elevators and escalators installed on time, in a timely manner, at every single station. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, for that question. I want to talk about like activism and like actually getting things done. And I think there's a balance here, and like Kumar is right. It's just like we need to get things done, and elected officials have to be able to move things forward. Right now, Brooklyn will be the only borough in the entire city in which every single District 75 school will have a sensory room. It's the only borough in the entire city in which no parent has to go to a school that's 2 or 3 neighborhoods away. Oh, sorry. I think it's a mistake. They didn't mute themselves. But it's we're going to be the only borough in which it doesn't matter where you live, your closest D75 school is going to have the resources necessary for young kids to be able to not only enjoy themselves with a sensory room, but also be prepared to start their day in a deregulated state, being able to get regulated and be able to get the experience and the opportunity to start learning immediately. That happens here. I saw an issue and I handled it. I dealt with it. And what you're going to hear a lot from me is every single time there was an opportunity to affect meaningful change in people's lives, I didn't only advocate, I didn't only march, I didn't only protest, I actually got something done. So not only did we fight for congestion pricing, and was I the first borough president to support the congestion pricing, when our kids with disabilities didn't have access to resources and rooms like sensory rooms, I got that done as well. Every time there's an issue, we figure out a way to make meaningful change in people's lives. So yes, I think parks is a next step and a place where we need to go. I've been trying to get a wheelchair accessible swing in Cooper Park for 12 years now. And I've been told by the Department of Parks that we can't get it done, which I don't believe. I want to be very clear. I think they're full of it. Before I leave here, and I'm talking about my position as a borough president, we will make sure that there is an accessible wheelchair swing in Cooper Park. And what happens there is that the leadership we currently have is a lot different than the leadership of the past. These folks have very small minds and narrow minds when it comes to innovation like that. And what we need is folks that can think outside of the box, that can think big, that are not limited by the traditions and the customs of the leaders of the past. I actually think we have a promising opportunity with Mayor Mamdani to think differently and ask for things that we might have not asked before. So I'm looking forward to advocating for more accessibility and opportunities for young children that are disabled or are neurodivergent in parks. But again, I've already done the job, and Brooklyn is going to be the most, District 75 friendly borough in the entire city because of our advocacy. Thank you.
Thank you, President, for building up schools. Students with disabilities are suspended at a far higher rate than their peers, and many are denied IEP accommodations. How are you, what legislation would you support to ensure that schools are compliant with the Students with Disabilities Act and are held accountable?
So I don't believe in suspensions outside of schools for any reason. I think at that point you failed your job as an administrator and as a teacher, and we have to have serious conversation about restorative justice opportunities, peer-to-peer restorative justice opportunities, and really looking to maintain our schools as education and academic institutions, not as entryways into the prison system or into entryways into a prison pipeline. And the only way to do that is to hold our schools to a higher standard, to think that a student in any way, shape, or form, whether they're disruptive, whether they're disruptive or they're having behavioral issues, that's a challenge for us to solve for those problems in a serious and thoughtful way, not an opportunity to make that problem, not make it so that you don't have to solve for those issues. So I'm a big fan of restorative justice practices. I want more guidance counselors in schools. My first bill that I ever passed in the city council was to add one guidance counselor for every 250 students in our education system. Then I learned about preemption and found out that the state would have to do that, but because of my advocacy, they opened up the deputy chancellor's office for guidance counselors because of the work that we were able to do. Now we have a deputy chancellor focused only and solely on that. And that's action again. Every time There's an issue that we have to solve for. I put forth legislation and affected meaningful change in people's lives. It's another example of when I saw that mostly black, brown, and children with disability were the ones that were getting suspended at a higher rate. And I looked at those schools, they had less guidance counselors than the schools where we saw lower suspension rates. So I decided to act, and now we have more guidance counselors than ever. We have a guidance counselor's office in the Department of Education, all because of my advocacy and legislation that I was able to pass. My first piece of legislation. Thank you.
The first time a parent walked into my office to seek support because their child had been suspended for quote unquote erratic behavior in school was the first time that I realized that this wasn't about behavior. What it was that teachers, guidance counselors, principals, our educators didn't actually know how to engage with their students. We had to go to a hearing. We had to file a lawsuit. We had to go to a hearing after hearing to get IEPs for our students. This is a failure of the administration. We have a federal law, right, that's supposed to, the IDEA, that's supposed to provide funding. There's never been anywhere close to fully federally funded to ensure that schools have the resources that they need to provide strong learning environments for every single student. But that doesn't happen. Why doesn't it happen? Does that happen in every school across the city? No, right? There's some schools in some neighborhoods that are doing just fine because they have all the resources they need, because the way schools are funded is by property taxes, right? Property taxes that are very hyper-local to those communities. And so those schools have more resources. Which schools are chronically underfunded and therefore have these higher rates that our borough president just talked about? These are the schools that are for mostly black and brown communities. And we see this trend over and over again. So this isn't just about getting more guidance counselors or driving more resources. This is about thinking about how it is that we actually fund education. Why is it that education in schools are only funded by property taxes local to your community? Why is it that this can't be communal? This is just like the way that we've continued to allow affordable housing and AMI metrics to be guided by this larger community. Has anybody ever sought to get affordable housing in New York and they do this test of the area median income, which includes like Westchester as well and other parts outside the city, and you're like, wait, this isn't actually local to this community at all. So if we can think about creative ways that we're actually funding the things that we need, like schools, instead of just assuming that this should continue to be the way that it is, then perhaps we'll actually get the resources necessary to do more than just get us guidance counselors, but actually build the learning environments where kids can thrive. And I understand that government is a bureaucracy and that it can be hard to impact change and that you have to have public hearings, and I appreciate all that. But I also think we need to see real leadership when it comes to coming up with the innovative ideas that can cut through that instead of just accepting that that's the way that things are going to continue to be.
I'm gonna move on.
So for our school system right now, when we talk about the federal government, what's going to be really important is how we acknowledge the systemic change at large by the Republican Party right now. Donald Trump has completely gutted our Department of Education, and there is no agency anymore. Anyone who wasn't laid off has now been furloughed or has been moved into a different agency. That is pretty horrific. As a product of public school, of public education, and as a beneficiary of that, I'm mortified. So that means that we have to look at the public education system at large on how it's being defunded and it's being privatized. They're being told to go to private school and you'll get a refund. And it's the same exact thing for those who are applying for an IEP and those who are twice exceptional or those who need to make sure that they have other needs that are met. And what we're seeing is the Carter cases. It costs us over $10 billion every single year for the Department of Education because of exactly what we've heard the other candidates say on the stage, is that we have to sue the public education system to get the money back for sending our child to a private school because our public schools simply are not equipped to make sure that these students are getting the education that is well-rounded and needed for their experience. That's pretty horrific from top down. And what we've seen with new leadership, as the borough president said, within the last 4 years that I've been in office, we've invested over $19 million to our public schools to make sure that they have sensory rooms and other ADA accessibility needs met, so that the children who are attending the schools really feel part of the education community. We've also opened up 2 new District 75 schools in my district to make sure from K to 8 that they are feeling at home. In addition to that, we also have a partnership with the Riverview School, where they have education for high school students and also just workforce readiness for those who are in high school to be ready to become independent as adults with needs and need for assistance. And we've also partnered with Birch, where Birch was the first nonprofit partner that was able to figure out the federal, state, and city funding to build housing for adults who have special needs. So I think that we have to look at the system at large, because there is a lot to be fixed. There's a lot of investments needed, and at every level we have to make sure that we're carving out a certain percentage to make sure that we are investing, because legislation can take time, legislation can become outdated very quickly, but we have to make sure that we're investing to make sure that those who have the needs are being met. And also, I love the timer. It kind of feels like I'm being timed, but I think it's unrelated.
Sorry about that, so just to keep it moving. So, millions of deaf, millions of individuals in the deaf and blind community rely on interpreters and captioners, but there are only 10,000 of them nationwide. What legislation would you put in place to support ASL interpreters at the education level, housing, and learning, and all aspects of accessibility? Could start with Claire Valdez.
No, it's a really important question, and thank you to our interpreters who are here this evening and our captioner for doing this essential work to make sure that this forum is accessible to as many people as possible. I think that we can look at a lot of different levers here to make sure that we're encouraging people to go into this field, which is so crucially needed for so many different constituencies all over the country and right here in New York 7. We can look at government subsidies. We can look at additional workforce development. We can look at accreditation, given that has government support to make sure that people can take the training they need to become interpreters. We're not going to be able to fill this workforce need if we don't provide direct support to people who want to pursue it and encourage people to do it, encourage debt forgiveness, and incentivize people to pursue this field. Without interpreters, forums like this can't happen, but there's so many areas of public life that people won't be able to participate in, and that's an attack on our democracy. It's an attack on people's ability to live freely in New York City, to get through government processes, and it's an affront to a vision of equal rights for everyone and equal participation in the society. So I think thinking about subsidies, debt forgiveness, pipelines for interpreters, and making sure that we're really incentivizing a talented workforce to do this essential service.
Great, thank you very much. Richard, I have one specific question for you. You tweeted about a blind refugee in Buffalo who had trouble getting back to his house and was actually killed because he was wrongfully deported and left 5 miles away from his home. How do you protect disabled migrants coming into the City of Dreams and assuring them that they are safe here, they can get their accommodations, and they are not denied services that are dire to their survival, that are important to their survival.
It's a heartbreaking story, right? To see what happened in Buffalo. Is a stark reminder of how absolutely broken, unjust, cruel, and inhumane our immigration system is. For 20 years, and for longer than that with family, I've been dealing with immigration. I've been dealing with ICE. I've been dealing with CBP. I was part of the coalition that worked on getting ICE out of Rikers 15 years ago, and I can't believe that we're still having to talk about ICE. We have to dismantle ICE. And by dismantle, I mean this isn't just about this rogue law enforcement agency that is terrorizing our communities on the streets. This is about an entire complex of detention systems and internment camps that are being built around the country, and a surveillance system that this government is utilizing to track not just non-citizens, but also US citizens. And this entire regime needs to be torn down. People forget that the immigration laws, when they were most recently changed, was actually during the Clinton administration, when a lot of the punitive elements of immigration were implemented, the ones that immigration lawyers struggle to navigate every single day. It was during that administration. And that is when we started to make our immigration system so punitive, so cruel, so inhumane, that we could have a situation in which someone is dropped off 5 miles away from their home and are dead because of it. So until we all come together and recognize the fact that our immigration system is absolutely broken, we must change it today. We're not going to get the change we need. And if you look at the polls, the majority of Americans now support some level of reform or abolition of ICE, and actually starting to talk about immigration reform again. I remember protesting in the streets of the city before DACA and DAPA were passed during the Obama administration, and we were so gleefully happy that we were going to get immigration reform. It didn't happen, did it? And we're still 20 years later still talking about it. So until we prioritize changing the way our immigration system works from cruelty and punishment and terror to fairness, to humanity, which is what this country is supposed to be about, we are never going to be able to prevent these situations from continuing to happen.
Thank you. Alright, let's go to healthcare. We're running out of time. This is a simple yes or no question. Are you I've spoken to state assembly members and city government leaders about the big beautiful bill. And in the legislation, it says that there are some exceptions for people with disabilities and other folks, but those details are not clear. Are any of you educated enough to know what those exceptions are, and how do you protect disabled New Yorkers from these Medicaid cuts? We could start with state assembly member Claire Valdez.
I'm so sorry. The audio on Zoom
It was the
is
exceptions in the Medicaid cuts for the disabled community, if you're familiar with what those exceptions are, and how would you ensure that the disabled community is protected with the Medicaid cuts that are coming? Did I get that right, Chris?
Yes, thank you very much for clarification.
So this is one of the big fights that we are facing right now in Albany. Is the cuts are coming from the federal government. We are in the midst of negotiating a $263 billion state budget. And it is my belief very strongly that we have the resources in New York State to make our communities whole, to make sure that everyone has the health care that they need, that our disability community is protected, that we can pay our home health aides a living wage and treat them with dignity. And it will require raising revenue. It will require taxing the absolute richest New Yorkers, the most profitable corporations, to fill these gaps and many others to advance a just life in New York City and New York State. And so when in Congress we have to overturn the one big, quote unquote, one big beautiful bill, we have to restore those Medicaid cuts, we have to make sure that everyone has the health care and the care that they need and deserve. And we have to acknowledge that the system was very broken even before the Trump administration took office, that the crisis in healthcare has existed for many, many, many years. And it's because healthcare is treated as a private good that you have to sacrifice a lot of money for, and that is contingent on where you live and your employment status, your immigration status, and that the only way we're going to have real healthcare justice for our disability community, for our immigrant community, for everyone is if we pass Medicare for all. And when healthcare is truly a human right rather than a good that is profited off of by the health insurance companies and private industry.
Do any of you know? Yeah, come on.
Yeah, so I'm not aware of the exemptions or what they are. What I will say is that the big beautiful bill's last days in Congress or in our federal government come January 1st when the Democrats take control of the House. And then we're able to negotiate and use our power of the purse of Congress to have a more serious conversation about the future of our budget in the United States. And we're able to leverage that against Republicans and Trump to try to reinstate not only the Department of Education conversation, environmental justice education, but just talk about the big beautiful bill and the unfortunate tax breaks that we continue to give to these millionaires. We need to do something about this. And once the big beautiful bill gets passed, if the congressional, the new version, I think they changed the name again because they have to keep rebranding it every time to try to get more votes. But we got to be ready to fight when we go to Congress. And I just want to say for the ASL interpreters that we need to support their union. We need to support their ability to organize. And in doing so, are able to negotiate higher prices or higher pay for these workers. And that's deeply important because the reason we don't have enough folks doing this work is because the pay is not sufficient enough. And we got to make it so it's more competitive and more people are invested in becoming ASL interpreters. And we do that by paying them more. So it's our ability to unionize, our ability to support them in their organizing in the union, and then just being able to fight and hold the line in Congress, which hasn't happened when it comes to these budget fights with Donald Trump and the Republicans.
What I worry about with the big beautiful bill, I know that we're not going to find out the details, especially until after the Medicaid. I mean, after the midterm elections, because the ways that the Republicans have designed it is so that it doesn't go into effect after the elections to protect their Republican body. But what I worry about as an immigrant myself that came to this country in '98 is the qualifications. Because what we've seen even with our SNAP benefits and what we'll see with our Medicaid benefits are changes in the qualifications of who qualifies for this. And even though they say that there's exceptions for those who have disabilities, we know that there's going to be a narrowed down, especially for those who are undocumented. You're going to have a social security number or a passport to apply and to be eligible. And we also know that there are other factors, especially for home-based care. And if you're in the middle of being able to have mobility but still need some sort of assistance, there's going to be a lot of people who lose their protections and their coverage. So I think we can expect that there will be even those who are supposed to be exempt with disabilities who are going to end up falling out of pocket and be faced with a lot of different bills, like medical bills.
Because if I just may, I want to agree with the Assembly member on something that was shared about recognizing it's not like our healthcare industry was working all that great before the Medicaid cuts went into place. And what's critical in this juncture for us to recognize is, sure, big, beautiful, whatever you want to call it. Sure, Donald Trump, but that's what we always talk about, right? That boogeyman or that person that's responsible and we're not them and we won't do what they do. Like, sure, but also we need to be making sure that we are presenting a vision that is bold, that is reimagining what our systems look like, and recognizing that, yes, there are Medicaid cuts, but even if we put those, if we don't have cuts and we reverse them, we don't end up with a great healthcare system. That didn't work that well in the first place. So we have to constantly be thinking about how it is that we design systems that actually work for people instead of accepting the futility of the systems that we've had for so long.
Thank you.
One other thing I would add is that we're probably going to see the same thing that we saw with our education funding, but for Medicaid funding, for you to qualify and to get reimbursed, that there's going to be a lot of rejections because there's this whole narrative of fraud, the rhetoric of that, especially for home care assistants, that there's a lot of fraud going on. So I'm sure that many of the funding freezes will continue to be, and if not, increase.
Councilmember One, it seems like you are taking a different position tonight as the one that you have previously taken, supporting the 12-hour limit to home care workers.
Yes.
And why did you support that bill in the first place? And how do you ensure that people get 24-hour coverage that they need going forward?
Yes. It's incredibly important that we have dignified care for those who need it and also those that who provide it. We need to have respite care for those who are working 24/7, literally. And it is unacceptable that the state of New York and the federal government allow people to work for 24 hours, 7 days a week without any breaks and underpaying them for the time that they're working. And we've seen year after year where we were told, don't worry, we're going to redesign it, because the state of New York is the one that designs the 24-hour healthcare process, and we have had enough. Most of the 24/7 healthcare workers are Asian American, Black, Latino. These are people of color who come from immigrant backgrounds and working class backgrounds who are being underpaid for the care that they do. But the work that they do is incredibly important, especially for the accessibility community. But we can't allow them to exploit them, as in the government, the state government, to exploit these workers who are vulnerable, who have no other form of work to survive, to be worked to death, literally, by working them 24 hours and 7 days a week. What the bill simply does is breaking the 24-hour cycle to 12-hour shifts, which is a humane and dignified way of working, and which, if we are trying to aim for, which Zohran Mamdani, the mayor, supported publicly before he was elected, because he also recognizes that 24 hours, 7 days a week of working is unacceptable for any human being. So we know that we have to pass this bill before the state budget passes, because then it would force the state to redesign the very program that they created for home care to be 24 hours, 7 days a week for one person, to now be broken up into 12-hour shifts, and ensure that they're paying the workers fair wages, which would only benefit the ADA community. Because when you have workers who are well rested, workers who are paid fairly, workers who don't have to be forced to work 24 hours, 7 days a week, and have breaks so that they can go to the doctor and have paid time off, that they will care for you infinitely better as well. But we never want you to be left out of the 24-hour cycle in which you deserve and need the care. It should just be done by 2 people in shifts instead of 1 person for 7 days a week, 24 hours in advance. And we've had multiple conversations with SEIU, we've had conversations with the legal department, we've had conversations with advocates, and we are fighting to make sure that we can force the state to redesign this process and fund it, because this can't go on any longer. It's dangerous for you and dangerous for the caregiver, and we want to see justice, and we can't allow these people to be exploited for so much longer. My aunt came to this country as a nurse, and she was a 24-hour home care worker, and what she had to face, being that that was the only job that she could do, Of course, it was fulfilling for her because she got to care for people that she loved, but it also worked her to death, and she did pass away.
Sorry to hear that. Assemblymember Valdez, I'll get back to you in a second because you did not have a position on this bill. But I want to follow up on Councilmember Warren. With this comment, can I say that you are opposing the transition to PPO, the CDPAP transition to PPO, because it is not paying home care workers spending?
So you're talking about the one that's this, wait, let me just double check so that I'm not telling you the wrong information. But where the state government put it into.
A private Texas company
CDPAP?
that took over.
So
the
CDPAP,
providers.
yeah, so I just want to make sure we're on the same page for CDPAP. Yep, yeah. Yeah. So I don't think that it should be, right now, we went from worst to worst. So CDPAP should not have been the way that it was. I don't know exactly, especially when I look at it from a procurement standpoint, from the former contracting standpoint as a contract chair, somebody is getting extremely wealthy from this system. And the accusations of fraud that the governor had for herself in justifying the single, it was a primary single private fiscal intermediary. I don't think that was the answer to fraud. I actually think that it made it worse because it delayed payments for all the healthcare workers themselves and the agencies, and it's only made the problem worse. Especially if we're not going to pay them fairly to begin with, and now to delay the payments even more with no benefits, it has not alleviated the problem. It's actually poured fuel and gas onto the fire.
Good. Assemblymember Valdez, can you state why you haven't taken a position into 303 that limit healthcare workers to 12-hour shifts?
Oh, I think the 24-hour shift without commensurate pay, I mean, those are intolerable working conditions. And we know that these workers are supposed to have, 5 hours of rest. They're supposed to have 3 hours of, food, meal breaks. We know that's not happening. And then we know it's not possible for that to happen in so many of these instances where people need truly 24-hour care. It's not fair to the workers. It's not fair to the people who rely on that care. And we need an equitable system to make sure that workers are compensated fairly, that they're not being burned out, and that this is a workforce that is treated with dignity, and that people actually want to participate in. We're going to see, the need for home health aides is only going to increase over time, and we won't be able to fill those positions if workers are not being paid adequately and if they're being truly worked to death to provide care for their patients. We need to be able to fund it. And it is correct that this is going to fall on New York State to provide the funding and make sure that we are able to transition to 12-hour shifts, that we're able to make sure that the Medicaid funding that's necessary to pay for those things is available. And again, like I said earlier, we're negotiating a $263 billion budget. I and many of my colleagues are fighting right now to tax the rich to fill budget gaps, but I think this has to be part of the conversation. It's unbelievably unjust that workers are being asked to work 24 hours a day without being paid for 24 hours care, and even if they were, that is not a sustainable workload, and it's not one that will keep qualified and excellent caregivers in this industry for the long run. This is a matter of justice, not just for the workers, but for the patients and the people that they're caring for. So I absolutely support a transition to a 12-hour workday. We're going to have to work very hard at the state level to make sure that we can pay for it, so there are no gaps in care and no gaps in pay for those workers as we make that transition to 12-hour shifts.
Good. Thank you very much. I think I'm going to move on to I'll start with you, Bill Cunningham. You said, Bill Cunningham, wait also. You said that if you win, you will try to repeal the Worker Amendment, allowing the federal government to build subsidized affordable housing again. How will you ensure that these units are accessible to people in wheelchairs? How many are you proposing the government to build? And have you done the math as to how much it will cost?
So the repealing of the Fairclough Amendment is deeply important. The crisis of our time is affordability, and at the foundation of our affordability crisis is housing. The Fairclough Amendment made it so that the federal government no longer is in the business of building housing. NYCHA was built, and the federal government said they don't want to build any more NYCHA. Now we're having conversations at the city and state level about something called social housing, which in all intents and purposes is just NYCHA by another name. Right? So what we want to do is repeal the Fairclough Amendment, allow for us to build NYCHA, but have something that I would call like a lockbox system for maintenance, that we won't allow for people to touch the maintenance budget long term of the affordable housing development work that we would do. And I would say two things. How we would pay for it. Right now we're looking to pay $200 billion for a war in Iran. We're asking for this $80 billion. I want to be very clear. 1 week in Iran, we can fix the entire NYCHA developments that we have here in New York City with $80 billion. So this is about priorities. This is about political will. This is not about whether or not we can pay for it. We absolutely can. We just need a government that wants to show up for people. And when it comes to accessibility, absolutely. I think what you've done very well is that the disability community has fought so well and organized so well that you've become central in any conversation that comes to infrastructure and construction in the city of New York. And we have organizations or companies, even some private ones, that are tripping over themselves to become LEED certified, to become the most ADA accessible buildings. Like now, we're seeing a competition to meet standards that you guys help set forth. So I would say a couple of things. Absolutely, for on accessibility for these buildings. 2, we need to get in the business of building again. We need to do social housing / NYCHA. And we absolutely have the money. What we don't have right now is political will.
Very quickly, are you optimistic that you can repeal the legislation?
I think so, because the housing crisis is not just a Democratic problem, it's a national problem. And if we can have a conversation with the Republicans about the fact that in Nebraska, in Alabama, it doesn't matter where you are in these red states, they're having housing crisis as well. And we have to find common ground to solve for it. And right now, the polarization that we have in this country is not necessarily just about Republicans and Democrats or left versus right. It's the poor, it's the working class across the board in this entire country that are suffering. So I believe it's one of the pieces of legislation that we can have a conversation about working with the other side to get done. And I think in this country, we're just tired of nothing happening, no progress being made as we continue to spiral down an affordability crisis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
5 more minutes, everyone, and then we're gonna have a round of questions.
Okay.
Great. Yeah, let's just move on to one question out of Clement, and then closing remarks. Yeah. Do you want to add something?
No, the only thing I wanted to add, I agree repealing Fairclough Amendment is critical and necessary. We should also be looking at how it is that, as I mentioned earlier, Section 8 exists as a federally subsidized program. In New York City, the biggest city in the country, the driver of what makes the United States so amazing, is the only city in the country that doesn't have any more access to the program. So why is it that our elected officials haven't made sure that we get the right resources driven to our communities. And that is an easy gap fill that we could do tomorrow. We could increase the funding for Section 8 immediately, not have to worry about repealing amendments, not have to be thinking about designing and implementing new funding strategies to build affordable housing. Let's just fund Section 8 and make sure that people can now start to access more housing.
Thank you very much. Employment question. What steps would you take to help ensure people with disabilities gain meaningful employment and at the small business level to ensure reasonable accommodations in the workforce and ensure their ability to have more decision-making power in their livelihood? That's to the floor. Anyone can start.
I'm happy to dive in. Let's talk about small businesses in terms of partnership, not penalties, because I think this is oftentimes how we engage when we talk about small businesses. They're failing to do the things they need to do, how it is that we're going to engage in enforcement and penalties against them. That's not what we want. We talked about earlier, small businesses are the fabric of our communities. So why is it that they're unable to comply with meeting the needs of their workforce? There's a couple things going on. And I know this as I've been an employer at a nonprofit agency, I've led nonprofits, and I had team members that I know were struggling. And I didn't know what the struggles were, but as a lawyer, I was very familiar with the idea of reasonable accommodations because I had asked for reasonable accommodations for my clients in housing. I'd asked for them in their employment. So when I saw this from my own team members, I talked to them about it and I was like, is this something you would like to pursue? You should do so with HR. Now, that is not how most small businesses operate. They're not even necessarily familiar with what reasonable accommodations are, let alone have the ability or wherewithal to make sure that their team members, their employees are given the opportunities to access them. So we need to make sure that we are creating a system, and New York City has a mechanism for this. We have a small business association that could do this, but we need to create a mechanism in which small business owners are given access to all the resources that they need in order to proficiently run their small business, and that includes understanding laws around reasonable accommodations. And that reasonable accommodations we're not always talking about massive expenditures, right? Sometimes this is about having flexibility in the workforce or having a work from home schedule or different physical equipment. But the idea of reasonable accommodation has become so intertwined with lawsuits, litigation, and cost that we keep talking about it from a penalty perspective instead of a partnership perspective. So let's make sure that our small businesses are supported both by giving them the skills that they need, but then also if they do need resources, ensuring they get the tax credits to build up the workforce that includes the disability community.
Yes, I agree that this is about providing technical assistance for ADA accessibility to small businesses. We should always lead with a carrot, not a stick. So I agree that we should be supporting our small businesses, and also we should be thinking about how we can incentivize them to do this work. Are there things that we can be doing to encourage small businesses to be doing because of opportunities for tax breaks or credits to make it happen? So I think this is a pretty straightforward answer, mostly because we're already doing this for other religious exemptions and accessibilities. We're running out of time. But yes, technical assistance to businesses and rewards and incentives.
And really quick, I want to make sure that we think about programs like, as a workforce development chair right now, I'm the first one in the city of New York. It's going to be really important that we have work incentives, but what I want to do is the same way we have MWBEs, that we should have a carve out or a favorability, a priority for disability-owned businesses like Mark Saxman Consulting, to make sure that they're getting a fair share as a subcontractor for a lot of these RFPs that may go out. And in addition to that, to continue to give more funding to schools like the Riverview schools, where they have professional training and they have career pathways for a lot of these students, so that they're being trained to work in the school cafe. And then because they're co-located with multiple high schools, those students get to serve the cafe lunch to other students in the co-located high schools. So that way they're able to have a clear transition into the workplace when they turn 18 years old. So continue to fund those kind of programs so that there's practical hands-on experience for them to transition and continue to have training, as we've heard.
Supermember Valdez, you got the last word.
So quickly, I agree with so much of what has been said. I would also say, that the government has a real role to play in guaranteeing full and meaningful employment for everyone who wants it. During the New Deal era, we had a federal jobs guarantee, and we should return to the idea that the government can step in to make sure that people have adequate employment if they need it, and that they have adequate accommodations. In my union at Columbia, so much of what we would grieve over are accommodations that the university was not giving to my shop members or my unit members, and that those fights shouldn't be so hard. Reasonable accommodations should be available to people. We should be able to adjudicate those cases quickly, and people should be able to get back to work as soon as the decisions and the accommodations are made. But so many people need accommodations for all kinds of different reasons, because they live with a disability, because they are a parent, and I really believe that the government can provide meaningful and dignified employment for folks who might need it.
Thank you very much, Supermember Valdez. Thank you very much to all the candidates here tonight. I appreciate your time. Thank you for sharing your insights into your initiatives as you take the seat in Congress. And I, as a journalist, will follow with you as the elections come closer.
Being from Disabled in Action and a disability advocate, I feel that disability should be mentioned more in the mayoral races and other elections.
I agree. Actually, disabled people include veterans, include seniors, and actually disabilities are the second largest minority voting bloc in the nation. You guys are very relevant politically.
But unfortunately, like for example, in the inauguration of Mondani, I was there.
Ooh.
And he did not mention anything about disability.
Thanks for keeping it real.
After all these years, that still occurs.
All right, so someone gets elected from District 7, and you're going to say to them, go ahead.
I really want them to truly understand that it's not the policy that changes lives within an individual with a disability's life, but it's what the people do that changes their lives. To truly embody and to understand the experiences of individuals with disabilities, and not just say what they're going to do to help them, but to actually do.
Hi, my name is Roman, and I'm from the Spoken Heroes. And what brought me on in this event is I also have a disability, so I'd like to shout out, the blindness and what we as the blind community go through.
Okay, thank you so much. Any particular today we may have someone elected here to Congress, right? Yeah, but so if you had a message for them, what would you want them to hear from you?
Make the street of New York more accessible for blind people, where we can walk freely. We don't mind the chaos, but make the chaos controllable.
So yeah, my name is Stephen McCoy. I'm the founder and president of Spoken Heroes, and we're just here to be able to support and make sure that our voices are amplified and heard today.